let me do a little bit of setup here, and then, well, we can actually begin. So let's do this. See if I can get this to work. Let's do this. Create new bound. Confirm. Okay. Confirm, and then do gate. Oh, you are seeing what I'm seeing. Okay, cool. Tube, zoom that. Hello. I almost didn't see you there, or rather, I'm seeing you and us from the last maybe 30 seconds ago because of latency. And really, I want to first introduce the concept of autopsy. So autopsy is something where pathology has some root in autopsy, auto and opsy. That means to see for oneself. And so I'd like you to think about that when we're talking about this, seeing for oneself, okay? So what are we seeing? You're seeing a 360-degree cast from this camera, I think somewhere over here, which is showing me watching you, right? But also, you're watching a stream from my video of me watching you watching me, right? We could even go one deeper here. I could go into a remote session, and I could watch the webcast of you watching me watching you, right? That's, I think, some of the very definition of meta. So let me take that off because you probably don't want to be watching me give a presentation looking like that the entire time. So I thought I'd do a little bit of show and tell and basically whet your appetite, maybe make you a little bit interested in this technology and give a little bit of excitement by showing and telling to you. And let you see some of the shiny stuff. So why don't you come with me? We'll go on a little multimedia adventure tour. And if you're interested in seeing one of the 360 tours and see for yourself, then you can visit this website or scan this QR code, and it will take you to one of the things that we've worked on. So why don't you come and see? Okay, I have the following disclosures and conflicts of interest. Except for some of the largest companies in the world dabble in VR and IT, nothing that I mention of them should be taken as an endorsement. The objectives are available here, and here's the outline. So I'm going to be telling you this in kind of a story form. So let's take a step back in time and zoom out a little bit. The problem, clinical pathology, is not really front-facing. It's not really visible. It's in the background. It's mysterious. People call it a black box, right? This is why we have our students who have joined us here today, really to see what this is all about, right? To see for themselves. And our solution to this was the courses, LabMed 680 and LabMed 685. I'm going to go mostly into LabMed 680 for today, but we can discuss later on some of the differences in how we see these two courses. And the story of this project is also the story of these clerkships. So prior to the pandemic, the Department of Laboratory Medicine and Pathology routinely offered LabMed 680. That is a 2-week, routinely offered modular clinical laboratory experience in which 1 to 4 students participated in interdisciplinary conferences, didactics, and toured the clinical laboratories at our institution. They were stationed in different laboratories and moved around each day to different labs, maybe like doing half a day over here and half a day over there. We considered the experiential content to be a prominent feature of this clerkship. The very definition of being immersed in the physical laboratory is actually physically being there, right? So autopsy, to see for oneself. So let's explore some of the limitations of this physical space though, right? Physical space, limitations, time and space, and therefore some overhead in terms of the administrative costs of this. And what do I mean by this? So let me open this up. See, go here, go to the starting location. So University of Washington serves the WWAMI region. That's the Wyoming, that serves the WWAMI region. That's the Wyoming, Washington, Alaska, Montana, and Idaho region. And physically in its naive state, laboratory medicine is only taught out of one physical location, that is the University of Washington School of Medicine. Right? But there's multiple different locations. For example, one could be at Harborview or anywhere in between. And that becomes a lot more overhead, right? If we go to each of the laboratories here, for example, if we want to go to the transfusion service, then we can see that we have some issues in terms of physical space, in terms of the number of students that can actually be accommodated in a physical space, in a physical location, right? And this dictates a lot of the logistics that are around this course, right? That means that there's a low number of students that can be accommodated. That means that we have to give the class multiple times per year, right? That means that it's generally only available to local students or at a high cost to visiting students. But there's also a high administrative coordination overhead for moving people from place to place. You have to make sure that people are over here, they have to go over here for a conference, they have to come over here for call rounds, et cetera, right? Okay, so let's go back here. This is another map, right? Different map. Look familiar to you? I think everyone probably knows what this looks like, right? The COVID-19 pandemic caused rapid evolution in medical education as remote learning was universally immediately instituted for in-person clerkships. Suddenly, everyone had to be remote. And there were some advantages and disadvantages. It's like the pendulum swung the other way, right? A remote clerkship allows for more students to participate in more locations and has greater scheduling flexibility. It provides challenges in maintaining learner engagement and providing experiential content. Everyone remember this? We're still kind of in that era, right? But so if I'm telling this story, once upon a time, things were like this until one day, COVID-19 hit us. And because of that, we were all in our homes. And I don't know if anyone else liked to do this, but I really spend a lot of time wistfully looking at other people's houses and kind of trying to go outside, right? Like, oh, there's such a nice house over there. And this is especially on real estate websites. So probably a lot of people have experience with this. And they have these 360 walkthrough tours. The thing that I really liked about these compared to static images is that I get a much better feel for the space when I explore it, when I can actually see, okay, this place relates to this other place, like where am I even, right? And I think one other important thing about this is, although I showed you VR glasses at the very beginning of this, that you don't really need VR glasses to get some benefit out of it, right? Because that's a high barrier of entry. So pathology is interested in imaging, mostly things on a microscopic scale. But what if it was interested in things on a macro scale, on a mega macro scale? I wondered if we could harness this methodology to stimulate learning within our clerkship. Maybe we could make this a tour, more like some sort of virtual scavenger hunt. Of course, I grew up playing video games, point and click like Myst, etc. This is probably before your time. You probably don't know what this is. I mean, this guy knows. And simulation and gamification, simmer down, Dan, is one educational modality that's shown effectiveness to increase learner engagement and retention, right? So what is gamification? Gamification is the application of typical elements of game playing to other areas of activity, be that education, marketing, and some of those game elements are things like action language, and don't be scared of this, but assessment, the method by which accomplishment and game progress goes on, conflict and challenge, control, environment, right? Game fiction, human interaction, immersion, or rules and goals, right? And these are some things that we thought might be hit by, using these kinds of walkthrough tours, okay? So while we're talking about terminology, what am I talking about? For virtual tours, maybe I mentioned virtual reality simulations, right? So virtual tours, the representation of an existing location with sequential videos or still images. So those could be video tours, still photo tours, etc. And VR simulation. So partial to full immersion through a digital environment, for example, computer, tablet, phone, screen, to foster a perceived lived experience, and that could be a tour, right? You're simulating a tour, for an intended outcome, be that learning or entertainment or edutainment, could be some variation thereof. And VR tours, for the purpose of this presentation, is the demonstration of a location using partial or full immersion in a digital learning environment, and is a subcategory or has elements from both of those things. So our objective was really to create an independent study tool to illuminate the clinical laboratory environment that was going to be immersive and engaging. And of course, since we're academicians here, we had some sort of experimental aspect. We wanted to, prove that, or we wanted to see if these were similar in terms of their engagement or their retention, in terms of the laboratory medicine content that was presented on such tours, right? And so how do we do this? Over here, I have a 360 camera, and over here on the screen, you also see 360 cameras. I had never put together a 360-degree tour. I doubt that many people in the audience probably have. So this was a bit of a learning process, but I'll go over this process briefly. So current commercially available 360-degree photography most often uses digital cameras which have dual fisheye lenses. They can take pictures in opposite directions. And then the captured images are basically digitally stitched together, and their seams are kind of are stitched and photoshopped in a sense, and stored in a variety of formats, although typically in equirectangular, cubic, spherical, or cylindrical projections. So software that's reading this basically restricts the field of view, applies rectilinear correction, and loops the edges to give it a kind of 360-degree feel, and a 360 continuous view. So more advanced hardware is available, and this might be integrated with LiDAR to create a rough three-dimensional model of a location. So they call this a dollhouse kind of thing. But those are real fancy and generally very expensive. So when creating these educational virtual tours, it's actually very important to be mindful of potentially sensitive information that might be captured. So prior to capturing the photographs, we inform the staff so that they can be in the picture or not. We inspect the area to make sure that there isn't any discernible PHI or protected health information that's in that area. We then, in post-processing, we'll also scan all of the photographs to make sure that there's not any PHI there. And we will apply digital blur and masking to employees' faces or any sensitive information that we find there. So no instances of captured PHI were identified when we went through these, but we did find some operational items such as phone numbers or people to contact that we blurred out, okay? Now, in the 360-degree tour software, you put navigation buttons labels, and interactive elements in the tour viewer. So these are basically like web pages. So you put an element of a navigation button. So let's see. No. I'm not going to sign in here, actually. But basically, you would put in an element of a navigation button, and then that navigation button goes to another page or scene, which is basically another photograph, right? And that's how you link all of these different places together so that it seems like that they're one big environment. In the fancy LiDAR ones, they have positional data where they basically know where things are in relation to one another, and then they are able to map those out. And so you'll see those in like fancy real estate websites generally. Or sometimes you'll also see the real janky ones, the real janky ones where they've kind of put them together and don't have the LiDAR and all of the fancy stuff, right? But then you can also put in these things that are like interactive elements. So for example, you can put in sound, video, pictures here, and maybe a little description of them. There's more fancy software where you can make them change other elements, but that requires a lot of overhead to do, right? And for this, we really rely on the medical director or someone from the lab to identify points of interest. So since Dr. Lieberman and I are co-course directors, and we chose micro and transfusion labs to fill with most interactive elements because we were most familiar with that for our educational experiment. We then created control versions which had the same information in a PowerPoint, but only had static pictures. So the point being was to set up a situation where we can test the effectiveness of two different types of tours. So the plan would be to split each of the classes, each of the different cohorts into different groups. We would randomize them. Basically, one half of the class would be Group A, and they would do something like the transfusion VR tour first. And then the other half would do the transfusion static tour first. And then they would do a assessment and survey, and then they'd switch, right? So the Group A would then do microbiology static tour, and Group B would do microbiology VR tour, right? In this way, we would achieve educational equipoise, and that way nobody had to do just boring PowerPoint in terms of their learning, right? And that way, this would be called a controlled evaluation without denying the curriculum to the control group, along with interspersed assessment and survey of the participants. For each tour, we had developed 8 assessment questions. I call it an assessment. Most people or our students would probably call this a quiz. And this was derived from material that we found that was to be found in each of the interactive elements in the tour. So students were told that their numerical score would have no bearing in their grade for the clerkship, but we would check to see if they completed it. Goals for the activity were mainly interactivity, understanding the laboratory environment, whether or not the activity was relevant and engaging. And we asked these questions on a 5-point Likert scale for subjective learner assessment of the assignment. So between April 2021 and 2023, so that's 2 years of running this, we had about 15 cohorts of students, 171 enrolled students. 16 students were unable to participate in the proctored activity due to scheduling conflicts, for example, excused absences, like residency interviews, medical illness, or other educational meetings. 155 students were randomized into the experimental comparison, and all students had at least one chance to participate in a VR tour during the experiment. And some students completed a VR tour for both activities. The class sizes were uneven, and so we had to collect some additional particular combinations of cohort types in order to have enough students for comparison. I'm not sure if I mentioned this before, but because there was, sometimes we would give the transfusion tour first, and then we would switch with giving the microbiology tour first, so that way that would kind of even out whether or not they encountered one tour first or another. So, and that's kind of shown in the purple here. Anyway, more than 80% were MS4s, so that's medical students in their 4th year, and about 75% of these were UW-WAMI students. However, only 38% were actually local in Seattle. 14% of students stated that they had a primary interest in a career in pathology at the outset of this rotation, and about 6 students later became residents in UW's pathology department. You know who you are. But that's not to say that there's necessarily cause and effect here, but that's something that, that they would have experienced, right? So there's a lot in this table, but I'll just do a quick summary. The average score that participants gave to the VR compared to the control was the same for whether or not they felt the activity helped them to understand the laboratory environment, adequately prepared them for the assessment, was consistent with the course goals, or was relevant to their education. Participants rated the virtual tour much higher in interactivity compared to the control, 4.5 compared to 1.0, and rated that they felt more engaged with the course when doing the other activity. I think that shouldn't really be a surprise, but it's not something that people have really investigated before, so who knows? I don't know. Participants scored about the same on the assessment statistically, so that was 6.5 versus 6.2, but not statistically different. And there was a greater than 90% response rate. One thing that I will talk about here is that actually, although students knew that the quiz had no bearing on their grade, we really did feel like this assessment was necessary to motivate students to actually go through the VR tour. So I'll explain that a little bit. We had piloted this before where we just had the VR tours and asked students, oh, hey, go through this. This is cool. Maybe you'll like it and maybe you'll have more experience with this. And actually, when we did that as a independent kind of study thing, but we didn't assign an assessment, a goal, we just found that users would navigate about 5 pages into the actual thing, right? Like if you don't have, actually, I see you smiling there. If you actually don't have to do it and there isn't that much interesting stuff, why would you actually go through the entire thing, right? I know how that goes. And in this activity, students were explicitly told that their score had no bearing on their grade. However, 4% of students attempted the quiz multiple times in order to achieve a higher or perfect score. Yeah, the students are laughing. They know the gunners. Okay, so I mean, you might think, okay, well, this is self-directed learning, but there's also the Hawthorne effect, where humans really try harder if they know that they're being observed. And this may play a role in situations where there's an achievable goal and you have a strong motivator for competitive learners, which, I don't know, medical students, if they would be called that. But anyway, so our data analyst, Jing Zhang, who was not directly involved with the course, conducted an analysis of student comments. And this revealed some key themes regarding their experiences. So this is a word cloud where some of the words appear more often, words that appear more often are displayed proportionally larger. And she also went through and tagged a bunch of comments as to whether or not they were positive, negative, et cetera. And positive feedback prominently highlighted words such as orientation, interactive, engaging. Conversely, common concerns included lost and confusing, particularly among those who struggled with navigation in the VR environment. But of course, there's kind of a timed element to this because we were proctoring this at the time. So many students said that they would prefer a guide or something to reference while using the VR tour to make sure that they had seen everything that's available. We speculate that some contribution due to the time pressure from the proctored experimental environment, and we should actually allow for unlimited time for exploration, which we have done where we set this out as an independent study activity, right? But we can talk about where things are now that we've kind of gone through this experimental portion or phase. So discussion for this. that this teaching modality, I think, is actually very well suited for experiential content where the physical environment or setting is actually very important, right? Virtual experiences give greater access to these physically restricted spaces where people are not going all the time, right? I think people have done similar kind of stuff in like the surgical environment or something like that, where you don't have to stand around to like retract, the belly for 4 hours in order to get that experience, right? And an assignment or goal is really necessary, I think, to motivate people to go through this material. This should be actually, I think, and this is more of an opinion, an activity of low-stakes exploration and discovery without time pressure, but with a goal in mind, which is why we do kind of keep in that we want people to go through a certain amount of it. I want to say that these tours really exist in a larger context by giving context for the black box of the laboratory and grounding it in a physical location and in realness, I would have to say. And this is something that really shores up one of the weaknesses of having an online rotation. Many students are interested in getting a feel for the lab, but most of the students are not really interested in pathology. So do they really need 80 hours of being physically present in the clinical laboratory to get a feel for this is what the laboratory actually looks like, right? Yeah. And you can give a thumbs up if you agree or not or whatever. Okay, never mind. Unless people really want to go into pathology, right? So enrollment with Clerkship really does allow for a greater geographic accessibility to our laboratory medicine education, even within our own institution. And it allows for actually a higher capacity, student capacity, in which we accommodate for about 14 students per cohort. So that's basically, it used to be, 12, 14 students per year. And now it's about 64 students per year who get to go through a remote clerkship. And this directly leads to greater visibility for clinical pathology. This is addressing something that is the black box of pathology. So some other applications of this, right? Let me see if this will actually open up. So it is used actually in our recruitment that we have these, right? I mean, if somebody's going to go to a place, don't you want to see what your laboratory will look like, what your actual office looks like? Is it really small or is it big? Is it in the middle of a crowd of other offices? People might want to actually look at that, right? So that's something that we do for our recruitment, right? We'll also use it for kind of promotion and demystification, and it is also used to a certain extent, or at least I think Jacob Mackey has kind of done some development for this in terms of basically making this kind of stuff available for people to see. So, there's parts of this that are applicable to, say, for example, anatomic pathology. I mean, I think one other thing that I'd bring up. So this is freezing everything. Okay. Oh, here we go. Say, for example, this is the transfusion laboratory, and if you, sorry for the blurriness, but if you wanted to look at various different processes that people go through, or that people are like loading up the radiation, like how does this actually look, right? You actually need this, and I think compared to, say, for example, still pictures or even just video where you have to capture a lot of angles, this is something where people can feel like it's a lot more immersive and where they understand how things fit together. For example, I don't know, if somebody has some sort of process in a biosafety laboratory hood, then that's something where it's very anchored in the environment of how you do things, right? Complex specimens or anatomic pathology specimens where three-dimensionality matters. For example, if you have a Whipple procedure and there's a lot of different things and stuff that's around it, you can understand the three-dimensionality more if somebody's, say, for example, grossing it in front of you and showing you that. I mean, you can get some of that in video, right? But you don't get as much of a sense of how these things work. Or if people need stuff from the environment, then how do you fit that in, right? So I think that there's some more niche kinds of applications where people can use this, right? Other things like simulation, we saw some kind of remote viewing, although this was at a delay, but maybe things will get better in the future. Live streaming and immersion, other things like augmented reality. I'm just going to gloss over that for now, but there's glasses for right now that people can use for productivity if they want a second or third screen that they don't want to lug around. Well, that they don't want to lug around like a big piece of heavy kind of monitor to do. There's glasses where people do that, right? So I think that there's other different things that people can, or other different applications where people can use this kind of technology. Okay, we published a short article about this in Transfusion, and we'll be coming out with a more complete treatment of this as our manuscript was accepted for publication by the American Journal of Clinical Pathology. I'd have to say that there's hardly any articles that really go into depth regarding implementation of VR modalities for pathology just in general, right? And one of the things that we did here was actually we did a kind of controlled crossover experiment to actually look at this and collected comprehensive data. And we really hope that this contributes to people's ability to implement this modality by showing how things can work, and maybe people can build on this. So I want to give some acknowledgements for people who really helped out in this. So that's Jessica Trong, Ryan Morse, Rida Hassan, in terms of people who have really helped to aid and prepare in reviewing the VR tours. Data analysis by Jing Zhang. Administering this is Brooke Emmerich and Ta Bui, as well as Josh Lieberman. And funding from CLIMB, the Center for Leadership in Medical Education, and the Department of Laboratory Medicine. One of the reasons why, secret reason why I got into this is, I want to play with cool toys and stuff in my work, right? Don't you? And I wanted to thank everyone because without your help, I wouldn't be able to make this virtually a reality. So I'll take any questions, and I know that there's stuff that I have kind of glossed over, kind of intentionally for streamlining this presentation. That is stuff like limitations and limitations of this, which is something that I'm very willing to go into if people are interested.
So Hamilton, I'm just curious. I mean, I assume that you had to go through IRB, right, to set up this kind of study, right?
Yes, I did. I submitted the proposal to them. They thought originally that people were going to be wearing these glasses and going to be immersed in some sort of environment. And when I explained that, no, it's just like this kind of thing where they can kind of explore around, they said that it's exempt from that kind of thing, or waived or whatever. So, yep, Kate?
I really like the videos where you also get to see people sort of doing their workflows. And I know the transfusion lab, I think maybe like right before I started residency or something, like rearranged some of their tables and desks and things. Like, did you all I could imagine using sort of these sorts of cameras to like watch for a day and track people. Like, is that something that this can be used for, or something you guys try?
Yeah, I think that this could definitely be used for that or for tracking around. Or let me repeat the question, is that Kate said that the transfusion laboratory has been rearranged, and whether or not we could use the kind of cameras to follow people around. And the answer is, I believe so. I believe the answer is yes. I think that gets into some of the limitations of this is, well, first of all, you have to have somebody who's going to be walking around and tracking someone. So there's some overhead in terms of capturing that and determining what is the best thing to capture or what's the most interesting thing. You can cut the video so that you get the most interesting parts of it, but I think the thing is determining what is the thing that's going to actually be interesting to look at in this. And how much time are people going to spend actually watching it? So you have to make sure that it is all of the best parts. Yep, Brody?
Kind of connected to that, how disruptive is the device in a physical space? Like, is it just coming from the Oculus, or is it a separate camera? Does it have to be stood up and like physically away from things so it can capture a full 3D field? Like the video you showed, how much of a pain would it be to have lab operations moving around that, or can it kind of be tucked in the corner and just left?
So Brody's question, or the question was, how disruptive is the camera that in terms of how much space does it take up, or if there's any physical limitations? And I'll just grab this. This is the 360 camera. It's not actually very intrusive. I mean, maybe this would be intrusive in your face. But, I think you'll see actually a lot of kind of YouTube videos where people are just holding this in front of them and and basically walking around. So I don't think that it has to be very intrusive. There's people who put these on their backpacks. There's people who, a lot of the people that you see like skating, they'll use one of these cameras so that it captures everything, and then they will just basically readjust it so that the framing is just looking at them. So if they can do that in a very active space, then I think that it's very easy for you to either, put this on top of somebody's head and they're walking around around all day, or wherever. And I think that it can be something that's actually very, very useful. And you've probably seen a lot of videos that have been captured with a lot of action. Obviously, we don't have the same kind of action of like where I saw a video where there's somebody who was diving off a board and they were doing kind of a flip, and somebody would throw this camera after them. And then so basically it was tracking them and falling at the same rate, and you could stabilize the video so that it was just looking at them, right? You've probably seen a lot of videos on a large streaming platform that has utilized this kind of technology already to capture those videos, and you can get a lot of action in them. Okay, Noah.
Hey, Hamilton, do you see any opportunity to provide some additional interactivity by using like a large language model that has some context about the space, so that you could ask questions or say, what's that instrument, or what activity is performed here? What are your thoughts about that? Or have you seen anything that combines like a 3D spatial view with a language model?
The question is whether or not a large language model could actually do more identification and tagging of different things within this space. You know what? I don't know. I'm not sure that I've seen anything where that's been done before. That might be a new avenue of thought. Like when you look at these pictures if you look at the pictures for too long, your brain kind of breaks because it's going off into all directions and there's perspective in all of these different directions. I don't know how if enough pictures of that have been fed into a large language model that it would be able to, that it would parse them the same, actually. But I think that would be an interesting kind of, exploration.
We have some interest from our online audience as well. So our first question here is from Fabian Lucas about how much this costs and if this could be sort of traveling equipment for the department so that different labs and divisions could have them handy for demos or for visitors or for specific other applications?
Well, funny story about that. When I was first doing the pilot, right, I wasn't gonna, like, you can't go up to somebody and say, "Oh, I'm gonna do this cool thing," and people are gonna be like, "Oh, what?" Like, and then so in order to do the first pilot, I went out and the first camera that I bought was a $50 Samsung Gear, like from 2017, and it took terrible pictures, but I was able to put together a pilot. So, but I think most ones that you would want to actually get, they range from 200 on kind of like the couple of years ago kind of model, and will be good enough, I think, for most intents and purposes. And then for the really fancy, like, pinkies up kind of, the ones with figs, kinds of cameras that have all of the LiDAR and that people use for real estate, where you have to rent them out. Those ones can be thousands or more, depending on what sorts of bells and whistles you want. So those are very professional cameras and have a lot of things that surround them and kind of specialized software to process them. So, but that would be, sometimes I think that those would be great if maybe you wanted to make a game or some sort of real simulation out of it, where you needed all of the three-dimensional data so that you could create some sort of model, which would be fun to do, but would require, I think, a lot of convincing that this is worthwhile, right? And then I forgot if I answered. I think I answered part of the question, but was there more?
Well, could this be a departmental resource? I think.
I think
that would be traveling equipment between different divisions.
You know what? Talk to Jacob Mackey. I think he actually has some cameras that he used and utilized for some of the anatomic pathology spaces. Right. This is my camera, so you can't have it. But I believe that there are some available. And when I first was trying to look and see if there were any available, I looked around and saw that there weren't any, which is why I, kind of went and did this and on my own initiative for doing this, just because I thought it was cool. I wanted to do cool stuff.
And then we have some other online questions, actually quite a lot of online questions.
Sure.
And I think people are thinking about other educational sort of ways that this could be applied. So one of those being our MLS rotations, right? The spaces for our students, and could we use this for that purpose?
Yes. The question is whether or not we could use this for MLS students. I believe so. I think that the difference for MLS students is that they will end up being physically in the laboratories a lot of the time, or are kind of in laboratory spaces or have a lot more access to them. But I would have to say that if they haven't seen them, then I think that would be a great resource. And I think that also the thing that I said about where the physical location, if that's important. So for example, like we're putting irradiator stuff here. We have a modification bench here, and it's important that we do things in a certain way and grab things from a certain location. I think that that's actually a good use or a good niche kind of what do you call it? Use case. Yeah. I saw a hand up over here.
I know you talked about it being useful for like seeing spaces, but also like for anatomy reasons. I know there's like some medical schools that do like anatomy virtually.
Yeah.
I'm just curious what your take is on how far we are from.
Yeah. The comment was on whether or not you could use this for something doing anatomy virtually. And yeah, I believe so, especially if like let's say you want something where they're like, oh, here's how I'm dissecting this, right? You can like show like a video that's kind of like shot from many different angles or something like that. But I think that's also something where if it was me and I was seeing that, like sometimes you're like, oh, what they're dissecting like C1 branch over here, but I don't know how that relates to the rest of the body, right? And then so you take maybe you take videos from multiple angles and you can go back and forth and be like, okay, I'm looking over the shoulder of somebody dissecting this, and this is what this actually looks like. I think that would be another cool use case. But that's something that where somebody else would have to explore. That's not my forte. Yep.
So right now, like as a medical student, I think like a lot of the interactive lessons that currently exist are like video interactions. Yeah. Like it's like, okay. So I guess I'm just kind of curious how you think this compares to like what's existing now with like interactive videos for learning.
So the question was how this compares to interactive videos. I mean, I have to see, what type we're talking about here. I think that this is something that's good for, like what I said, like an immersive thing where being in the physical space is something that's very important. And I guess, I mean, could you explain a little bit more what those interactive videos are like?
I'm just thinking like there are a lot of like video tours of spaces that exist, and or like for anatomy there are videos and like you go through it and then it pauses and it's like has a quiz that pops up.
Yeah. Yeah. So yeah, I'd have to say that I'll use the kind of real estate tour analogy again. Like for me, when I go through a tour, I like to go at my own kind of pace, and I like to see, okay, I'm going over here, I'm going over here, I'm going over here. So I know how all of those things are connected. And kind of video tours, you can you can shoot it in a certain way that people understand that a little bit more. But I think it's different than if you're like, okay, I'm controlling myself to go over there. Like, there's like a different level of that kind of understanding of like, hey, I'm going to pause here and, look around and okay, I know where, and whatever, there's like some chairs and junk over here. Like you only see what people want you to see if you do that, right? It's kind of more curated in a sense. And so that's fine and all, but I think that for this to be like, hey, I'm actually in this space and I'm actually here and able to see, whatever. There's some, random monitors that are up here. You don't get to see that. You just see like all the highlights when you do that, and not the entirety of the space. So, okay. Were there any other questions?
You kind of covered most of the topics, so.
Okay. Josh?
Hamilton, it's really cool to see how this has sort of taken off and spread into AP and other realms. I remember one of the things you were working on was sort of actually doing procedures in either simulated or showing real procedures. And I guess where do you see sort of the next level of this, Noah brought up sort of interactive, ask questions about different instruments. In terms of lab processes and sort of deeper dives into Latin and pathology, what's the low-hanging fruit maybe is the next?
So I think like what I envisioned was, first of all, showing that something like this works, right? That it's something that, you have to walk before you can run. You have to show that this has some benefit before you're like, oh, I'm going to develop a full game and an interactive world and universe of this. I mean, in a sense, we did catch a lot of different labs. So there is kind of a little University of Washington microcosm or micro universe that's in here where you can go from lab to lab. But I think, okay, so that's one thing, is maybe capturing more labs so that you have more coverage over all of the different labs. I think there's some things with interactivity, but I think you have to, kind of show that even this has some sort of value before you put in a lot of effort into developing something that's more, that's larger, right? And you have to kind of ask yourself, what's the marginal or the marginal value of like putting in something that's even more immersive and more immersive and more immersive, right? Like, what are we getting out of that? It would be really, really, really cool to have, hey, this is a Myst-like, entirely interactive kind of game of going in and actually experiencing the lab and messing with all of those elements. And I think that that's possible. But then it's like, okay, well, like how do you, like you can get there from these kinds of steps of capturing a space, capturing individual elements, putting them in there, making them more interactive. Though you'd have to ask, like, to what end you're kind of doing that, right? It would be really, really cool. And you know, if you had the right funding and kind of showed that and kind of got there, I think that that would be maybe the dream. But you know, you have to, I think, get backing for something like that in the first place. Yep.
Yeah, again, thanks for a great talk. I wonder if you thought about the potential role of this in CAP inspections or laboratory inspections, where there's the walkthrough component that's typically rushed because we're all, you know, coming from across town or across the country, jet lagged and so on. And so it's a snapshot, but this would allow kind of a leisurely and more detailed tour of the lab. And actually thinking about Noah's suggestion, maybe you could have AI look specifically for the elements that are necessary for inspection. But this seems to me like you might save a lot of time and money and potentially do a better job.
Yeah, the comment was on CAP inspections and whether or not you could use this for kind of capturing a space. I think that there could be a way to do this. After all, we did do a kind of very short kind of remote viewing and semi-live kind of viewing also. I guess, you know, I think people might ask, like, whether or not people know that the camera is coming through and they're like, okay, everyone on your best behavior. But people do that anyways with when they know that inspectors are around, right? I think yes, if you have to do things for spot checking, I think that's entirely possible. You'd have to make sure that it's kind of live. One of the limitations that I didn't really talk about here is like the amount of data that this consumes. You know, if I was to leave this on the entire time, my phone would literally get to 5% and then tell me that it's overheating. But I think with the newer cameras that they're able to shore up some of that in the beginning. But whether or not I think that there could be something like that or some sort of kind of remote telepresence, I think that that's possible. It's just, you know, who would fund that? Like, you know, maybe in the future, like, you know, 2050, we'll be remotely viewing stuff. I don't know. But I think that we'd have to make sure that there's a good use case for it. Okay?
Great. Thank you so much.
Thank you.